My name is Moira Callander. I am 67 years old. This past spring, my daughter put my house up for sale without asking me. She didn't warn me. She didn't suggest it over the phone. She arranged it the way you arrange a hotel room for someone else, efficiently, with their preferences approximate and their consent assumed. A lockbox appeared on my front door on a Thursday morning in March, and nobody told me the combination. My neighbors on Brucedale Avenue started looking at me differently. Not with anything you could point to. Just that particular softness people put on when they've already decided something is sad and they're bracing for your reaction to catch up with theirs. Marjorie, across the street, who I have traded garden cuttings with for 19 years, brought over a pot of soup 2 days after the for sale sign went in. She hugged me at the door in that careful way people hug something they think might break. I let the showings happen. I let strangers open my cupboards and run my taps and stand in my garden, commenting on the lilac hedge my husband planted in 1998 because he read somewhere that lilacs attracted butterflies, and he wanted our granddaughter to grow up watching for them. I let them walk through every room in a house I have lived in for 31 years. And I said nothing to stop it for 68 days. Welcome to Fierce Mom Stories, where women who are counted out end up holding the last word. Subscribe and let me know in the comments if any part of this has ever happened to you. The house is at 47 Brucedale Avenue East in Hamilton, Ontario. 3 bedrooms, a sunroom. My husband enclosed himself in 2001 because he wanted somewhere to sit in February that didn't feel like punishment. We bought it in April of 1994 for $161,000. The bank told us we were stretching. They were right. That first winter, we kept the heat at 18 degrees and wore sweaters indoors and didn't complain about it once. My husband Edmund died on the 4th of February 2012. He was 61. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to the day, I made coffee for one person for the first time and couldn't finish the cup. I have made coffee for one person every morning since, which is something I can say now without stopping in the middle of it, though it took several years before that was true. People ask what I did for a living, and I usually say I worked at the courthouse. That's accurate. What I don't usually say is the rest of it, because the moment you mention anything involving law, people either assume you're a lawyer and become cautious, or they assume you're a file clerk and stop listening. For 26 years, I was a senior clerk at the Superior Court of Justice in Hamilton. I processed filings, managed case schedules, and read documents for a living. Wills, deeds, powers of attorney, court orders granting or removing guardianship, property transfer records. I read them the way other people read the newspaper, quickly, looking for what was actually being said underneath the language being used to say it. Remember that, it matters later. My daughter, Astrid, came on a Sunday in March, the week before the lockbox appeared. She's 48. She has her father's stubborn jaw and her grandmother's way of tilting her head slightly when she's already decided something and is waiting for you to come around to it. She drove up from Mississauga. She brought a bag of those butter croissants from the bakery on Lock Street that I like, which should have told me something, because she only remembers the croissants when she wants the visit to go a particular way. She set a brochure on the kitchen table while I was putting the kettle on. Maple Ridge Retirement Living. A woman with silver hair laughing on a terrace with a mug of something warm. I didn't pick it up. I let it sit there. Barrett and I have been talking, she said. Barrett is her husband. He manages logistics for a freight company. He is not a stupid man. He is the kind of man who prepares for conversations by deciding in advance what the other person's objections will be and preemptively dismantling them, so that by the time the other person opens their mouth, the architecture of the decision has already been built around them. They'd been talking about the house, she said, about how much space it was for one person. About the roof. I had the roof replaced in 2019. She said the yard was getting to be a lot. I said the yard was 1/3 of an acre and I managed it fine. She said the stairs. There is 1 step up to the front door and 4 stairs inside to the upper landing. She looked at the brochure instead of at me and said, Mom, You're not as steady as you used to be." I poured the water. I let it steep. I asked her one question. "Astrid, who did you speak to before you spoke to me?" She touched the corner of the brochure. That was one answer. The second came when she said there was a realtor named Keith who had been very helpful. "Helpful with what?" I asked. She said he had done some research on comparable properties. Research, the word people use when they mean appraisal, but don't want you to know they've already had one done. She said the market was strong right now, and if we waited, we'd be leaving money on the table. I noticed that word. "And where would I go?" I asked. She tapped the brochure. "You'd be comfortable, Mum." That was the whole sentence. "You'd be comfortable," delivered to the laminated photograph of the silver-haired woman on the terrace. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I said, "Do you want a croissant?" She said she had to get back before traffic. She left the brochure on my table and kissed me on the cheek and drove south on the 403. I read the brochure after her car left the driveway. Maple Ridge has a hair salon on Wednesdays, a putting green in an interior courtyard. Studios starting at $4,100 a month, which is a number she had clearly already looked at and clearly already worked out how to cover. I put it in the drawer under the telephone with the takeout menus. Then I went outside and stood by Edmund's lilac hedge for a while. It was too early for the buds. It stands there every February and March, looking like something that might not come back, and every May it proves itself wrong. Edmund planted it crooked. He knew it. He said he'd straighten it when the roots set, and then he never did, and now it's been crooked for 27 years, and it blooms anyway, listing slightly west like it's leaning in to hear something. I want to be fair to my daughter, because the truth is harder to look at than the simple version. In the autumn of 2009, Edmund's father had a stroke in Thunder Bay. My daughter flew up alone, managed his care, sorted the paperwork, and drove 8 hours in January ice to get him settled at a facility in Sunbury, closer to other family. She was 40 then. She did it without complaint and without asking for anything in return. I have never once pretended that wasn't real. But here is what grew in the quiet. In 2019, my daughter opened a wellness studio in Port Credit. Pilates, registered massage, the kind of services that sit between medicine and trend and depend entirely on whether the neighborhood wants what you're selling. She borrowed $230,000 from a private lender at 13%. She signed a lease with she hadn't read carefully. She later said she hadn't read. By late 2022, she was covering the debt by extending the loan. The studio closed last spring. She and her husband have a second mortgage on their house in Mississauga. I know all of this because my granddaughter told me, and my granddaughter tells me the truth. My daughter also asked me, in 2020, for $60,000. She had a plan. It was on paper and some of it was reasonable. I said no. I told her why, which is that I don't lend within a family. I give or I don't, and I wasn't in a position to give $60,000. That was true. It was also, I understand now, a very tidy sentence to deliver to someone who had already prepared herself for it. In 2022, I gave my granddaughter Penny $12,000 for her second year of nursing at McMaster. My daughter found out at Christmas. She smiled and said, "How generous." I watched her file it. Not as generosity. As a number in a column I hadn't been shown. The arithmetic of my money had been running in her head for 3 years, and that $12,000 added something to a ledger entry she never showed me directly. She didn't have to. It had been sitting in the room at every family meal ever since, taking up a chair. Keith Alderton came to the house in late February. He called me Mrs. Callander, which nobody has called me in years, and asked to walk the property, which is what realtors say when they mean come inside and assess what you have. I let him in. I want you to notice that. I let him in. He was pleasant. He took photographs on his phone. He told me the roof was aging, which was the same wrong fact my daughter had used, which told me exactly where she had gotten it. At the door on his way out, I asked him directly whether he understood that I lived here. He gave me a look I've seen before on men who have already decided and chosen to stop taking in new information. "Of course," he said, But these decisions really come from the family, Mrs. Callander. I've been through it myself. My mother's place in Lancaster sold it for her in 2021. Best thing that ever happened to her. He says it was the right thing to do. He said it twice. I believed he believed it. That was the part that made my stomach pull. He wasn't running a deception. He had built an entire professional identity on the sincere conviction that families decide and owners absorb. He had never once, in any of these conversations, asked me a question and then actually waited for my answer. On the 15th of March, my daughter signed a listing agreement, not as my representative in the informal sense. As my attorney, in fact, there is a line on those forms. She wrote her name there and 4 words beside it, per power of attorney. Keith emailed me a courtesy copy, the way you would copy a landlord on a maintenance request. I printed it at the library on King Street West. 20 cents a page. I read it at my kitchen table with Edmund's letter opener, a flat brass thing, initialed EC, that his father gave him when he finished his apprenticeship. I've used it since Edmund died the same way he did. Point down into the corner of whatever I'm reading. I underlined one clause on page 3. A reference to a power of attorney for property, dated and registered, that purportedly authorized my daughter to execute documents on my behalf concerning real property, dated 2015. I sat with the letter opener in my hand for a long time, because 2015 was real. I signed it. I meant it, in 2015. I'd been scheduled for a hip replacement, and I wanted someone who could act if something went wrong under anesthetic. It was registered with the Land Registry Office because that's what you do when a power of attorney might touch a property. What Keith didn't know, and what my daughter apparently hadn't thought to check, was what I had done in the summer of 2020. I'll tell you, but not yet. Because the order matters, and because I didn't do anything about it in March either. The lockbox went on the following Thursday. Keith hung it himself, a small gray box, clamped to the handle with a rubber-coated hook. He tested the latch and told me it would make showings easier. It saves you the inconvenience, he said. Everything they did that spring, they did to save me inconvenience. That evening I went to the garage. Edmund's bolt cutters are hung on a pegboard between the pipe wrenches and a coil of wire he bought in 2003 for a project he never started. 18-inch handles. They would have taken that shackle off in one squeeze. I took them down. I stood in the dark for a while, in a garage that still smells like wood shavings and the particular oil he used on his tools. Then I put them back. I want to be honest about why, because if I let you think it was entirely strategic, I'd be cheating you, and this story depends on me being straight with you. Part of it was strategic. I'll get there. The larger part was simpler and colder. If I cut that lockbox off, my daughter would put a new one on the next day, and then I'd know. As long as I left it there was still a version of the next few weeks where she stopped on her own, where she drove up on a Saturday morning and sat on those front steps and said, "Mom, I went too far." That's all it would have taken. One sentence at my door, and I would have made coffee and we never would have spoken of it again. I would have spent the rest of my life saying she had a difficult year and meaning it. I went inside. I left the light on over the stove the way I do. The lockbox stayed on my door. The photographer came. The stager came. Then my daughter came with flat-pack boxes and a printed list with 3 columns. Keep, donate, toss. She moved quickly through the rooms with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this in her head many times. Around 2 in the afternoon, I came out of the bathroom and found her holding Edmund's work vest. Navy canvas insulated. His company name, Callander Mechanical, embroidered over the left chest in gold thread. He'd worn it every November through April for 12 years. It had been hanging on the hook by the back door since February 2012. She had it folded over her arm and was reaching for a garbage bag. "This one's a toss, Mum. It's worn through at the elbows." I took it out of her hands. I didn't pull. I put my fingers on the collar and lifted, and she let go, and neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she pressed a label to the box by the door that said "Condition Questionable." I understood that I was going to end up in one of those boxes eventually, with a word on me about my condition. Brucedale Avenue is a short street. Most of the houses were built in the same decade. Most of them still hold someone who moved in before cable television arrived in this part of Hamilton. Marjorie had soup on my doorstep by Saturday of that first week. She held my arms and looked at my face the way you study something for damage. "You just say the word," she told me. "If it's too much." She didn't finish the sentence. I knew exactly what the end of it was. At the mailbox the following week, the neighbor from the corner said, "It must be exciting. A new chapter." A man 2 houses down stopped mowing and told me his aunt loved Maple Ridge, said it with an authority he hadn't earned. Nobody on that street asked me one direct question. They asked each other, and then they asked me things that already had the answer built in. By April, on my own street, in the house I had bought in 1994, I had become a situation being managed. I want you to sit in that for a moment. Not the sale. The pronoun. The passive construction of me. The open house was a Saturday in April, 11 to 2. My daughter texted me the night before, "Better if you're not there. Buyers find it awkward." Then a smiley face. So Saturday morning I got dressed, put on lipstick, and walked across the street and sat on Marjorie's front steps. She brought out 2 mugs of tea. We watched 17 cars come and go. A couple in their 30s stood in my driveway, looking at the gutters. A woman in a yellow jacket opened my mailbox for no reason at all. 2 people came out, and one of them said everything's original, and they both laughed. And I didn't know if they meant it as a compliment. The lockbox knocked against my door every time it opened. From across the street, it sounded like someone tapping to ask if anyone was home. Around noon, a family came through with a child of about 7. He grabbed a branch of the lilac hedge on his way back to the car. Just grabbed it, the way children do, and a length of new growth came away in his hand. His mother said to put it down. He dropped it on the walk. Nobody picked it up. Marjorie said, very quietly, "Oh, Moira." I said it's a tough plant. I did not cry on those steps, not because I am particularly strong, but because by then everything I did was going to be read as evidence of something, and I had decided to be careful about what I gave them to read. My son-in-law called that evening to say, the showing had gone well, Keith was optimistic, and they'd have offers by the end of the month. He said I'd be settled in at Maple Ridge before the summer heat came. He had the voice of a man who believes he is solving a problem rather than creating one. I had a colleague at the courthouse, a woman who worked 2 desks over from me for 9 years. In 2022, her son decided she could no longer manage her own finances. They argued in her kitchen, she raised her voice, she threw a dishcloth into the sink. 6 months later, she was served with an application for guardianship in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. I read the supporting affidavit. 2 paragraphs were about that kitchen afternoon. Agitated, unable to accept support. She spent $28,000 fighting it and she won. She kept her accounts and her independence. She also doesn't have people over much anymore. Something in her went quiet that never came back entirely. When my daughter put the brochure on my table in March, I called a lawyer named Gail Sproul on James Street South. 62, retired from litigation, now practices elder law. She charges by the 6-minute increment and she doesn't soften things unnecessarily. I told her everything. I asked what I should do. She said, "Moira, if you fight this at your kitchen table, you lose. Not because you're wrong, but because a kitchen is an emotional room, and anything you say in it becomes evidence about your state of mind. You need a room where what matters is what's written on paper, not how you sound when you say it." I told her I knew exactly the room she meant. She said she thought I might. There is a second reason I waited 68 days, and it's the one I'd rather not say out loud. I was hoping my daughter would stop on her own. Every morning I woke up thinking today, she drives up those steps and says she got ahead of herself. That's all it would have taken. One sentence at my door, I would have handed her a coffee, and we would have let the whole thing dissolve. I would have spent the rest of my life saying she had a hard couple of years, and meaning every word of it. I hadn't finished hoping yet. Now I'll tell you about the summer of 2020. Because that's the reason nothing my daughter did that spring had the effect she was expecting. In June of 2020, she asked me to have lunch on Lock Street. She was pleasant through the whole meal. Then over coffee, she said she wanted to talk about the equity in the house. She had a plan. She wanted to take out a home equity line of credit, perhaps $100,000, and she'd been looking at lenders. She needed me to sign a few things, she said. Just a formality. I said no. I said it once kindly. 8 weeks later, a letter arrived from a lender in Oakville thanking me for my recent HELOC application and informing me that due to a title issue, they were unable to proceed. I had not applied for anything. She had used the 2015 power of attorney. She signed my name with her own hand and 4 words after it. Attorney, in fact. It wasn't forgery in the technical sense, because the instrument existed. The application failed not because anyone caught what she'd done, but because the lender's title examiner had pulled the chain of title and found something that made them stop. She called me a week after the letter arrived. She was annoyed. She said there was probably some issue with the title records left over from when Edmund's estate had been settled. She never once asked what the issue actually was. Not in 5 years. I went to the Land Registry Office on King William Street in August of 2020. I filed a revocation of the power of attorney. 3 paragraphs. Signed, witnessed, and registered on title. I also mailed my daughter a copy. Registered mail, return receipt requested, because that is how a person who spent her career reading what's underneath the language says something she needs to be able to prove. The green card came back 10 days later. The signature in the delivery box is not hers. It is a rounded, looping hand. My granddaughter, Penny, had been visiting that week. I put the green card in a file folder in my hall closet, along with the revocation registration, the original deed documents, and every piece of paper my daughter or Keith Alderton had sent me since March. Every single page in that envelope they generated themselves. They CC'd me on everything. They were so certain of what they had that it never occurred to them to check what I might be holding. My granddaughter, Penny, is 25. She's finishing her nursing degree at Master and works weekends at a clinic in Dust. She is the only person in my family who looks directly at a thing and then asks about that thing, instead of asking about what they hoped the thing would be. She came by on a Tuesday in April with 2 coffees and stood on my front step staring at the lockbox. She said it looked like a handcuff on my door. Then she sat down on the step in her scrubs and cried, which I was not prepared for. She had seen the MLS listing her mother shared on Instagram with 3 house emojis and the words "big changes for grandma." She said she'd come to the closing and make a scene. She'd film the whole thing on her phone. I said no. I told her something I meant. If you make a scene, it becomes a story about a family fight, and everyone in that room will believe the version that's easiest to believe about a 67-year-old widow. She was quiet. Then she said, "So you're just letting them?" I said I was letting them get all the way to the end. She looked at me a moment longer than most 25-year-olds look at anyone. Then she said she'd bring me coffee every week until it was over. She did. Every single week. That girl has never once spoken about me in the third person while I was standing in the room. In the first week of May, an envelope arrived addressed to owner or occupant from a title insurance firm in Toronto. It was the preliminary certificate issued as part of the sale process. 10 pages, routine, the kind of document that goes to the seller, the agents, the lawyers, and as a matter of course, to the registered address of the property. Because the person living in a house has a recognized interest in knowing what's being reported about it. It came to my mailbox because it comes to everybody's mailbox. I read it at the kitchen table. Near the back, there is a section listing encumbrances on title, registered claims, interests, notations that affect what can be done with the property. I got to item 7 and read it 4 times. Then I laughed once, which surprised me, because item 7 had been there the whole time. That certificate had gone to Keith, to both lawyers, to the buyers, to my daughter. 5 adults received that document before I did. I have watched people ignore preliminary certificates for 26 years. Agents forward them. Lawyers skim them. Nobody reads the exceptions carefully because the exceptions are full of dry language, and everyone assumes someone else is handling the dry language. I sat on the arm of the couch on a Tuesday in May and knew, with complete certainty, that not one person who had received that attachment had opened the item's 7 paragraph. I also knew that the morning of closing, someone at the title company would have to. On a Thursday in May, I drove to the Land Registry Office on King William Street. The public research counter is open to anyone. You walk in, you take a number, you wait for your number to be called. You ask to search a name in the parcel register. It costs nothing to look. You need a name or a civic address. I used both. The screen gave me the history of 47 Brucedale Avenue East, back to 1994. Mortgage registered, discharged. Refinance, discharged. And then in December of 2008, a transfer. Edmund and I had gone to an estate lawyer when he was first diagnosed. We had wanted to avoid probate and the delays and expense it causes for a family in grief. What we signed, what the lawyer explained, and what Edmund understood and initialed, and what we both meant, included the following clause in the grant deed of transfer: reserving unto the grantors and the survivor of them a life interest in the said property for the term of their natural lives. Edmund died in 2012. His half of the reserved life interest ended with him. Mine did not. My daughter holds a remainder interest in the house. She has held it since December 2008. She cannot convey title to a property that I have a registered right to occupy for the rest of my natural life. You cannot a house that someone has a registered life interest in without that person's signature on the transfer documents. I had the clerk print 2 certified copies. The fee was $11 cash. She stamped them with the raised seal. I folded one in thirds, put it in my purse without reading it again at the counter because I already knew every word. I'd watched it get drafted in a lawyer's office in 2008, sitting beside Edmund, who signed it with a pen the lawyer set on the table in front of him. Good heavy pen, because by December 2008, his hands had started to need the weight. I drove home the long way, past the hospital on Concession Street where he had his last infusions, past the coffee shop on Locke where we went on Saturday mornings, and he always ordered the same thing. And after a while, they stopped asking. I already knew what the documents said, but it mattered to have the raised seal on them. It mattered to have paid $11 and driven home with them in my purse. In early May, Keith texted me. Firm offer, accepted, closing June 20th, then a small house emoji. My daughter called that same evening, warmer than she'd been in months, which told me everything about what temperature of person she was when she wanted something. She said the buyers were a young couple from Burlington, early 30s, lovely people. She said Keith had handled everything and I didn't need to worry about a single detail. She said Maple Ridge had a suite available in the garden wing with a south-facing window, and she had already put down a deposit to hold it. She said I didn't even need to come to the closing, that everything was being handled. I said okay, then I hung up and found Gail Sproul's number in my contacts. That night I sat at the kitchen table and wrote 3 things on the back of a grocery receipt with Edmund's letter opener holding the corner flat. Closing date, the address of the law firm, and the name of the title company. 26 years of court filing reflex. You write down the file reference. The closing was on Friday, the 20th of June, at 10 in the morning, at a law office on King Street East. The conference room had the standard setup. Long table, water glasses, a box of tissues in the center of the table, which is how you know what kind of room it is and what the firm has learned to expect from the people who sit in it. I arrived at 9:45 and sat at the end of the table with my purse in my lap. The buyers came in first. A couple in their early 30s, and they were lovely, which was the hardest part of the whole morning. She had a printed folder with a photo of a beagle clipped to the front. Their lawyer sat beside them, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain. Keith came in with 2 pens. My daughter came in with a travel mug and sat at the far end. My son-in-law came in last, on his phone, said, yeah, I'm here, ended the call, put his hand on the back of my chair, not on me, on the chair, and said, "You doing all right, Mum?" The file lawyer, a woman in her 40s, came in with a rolling cart and a document stack 4 inches thick. She went through photo identification. She checked mine against her file. She paused. 1/2 second, the kind that means something has appeared on her screen that she wasn't expecting. She asked my daughter to confirm she was signing as attorney, in fact. My daughter said yes. The lawyer asked for the original power of attorney instrument. My daughter produced a copy, which she set on the table. The lawyer said that was helpful, but she'd need to step out for a moment. Something had come up in the title review. She came back 5 minutes later with a printout and another woman I'd never seen. 30s, cardigan, hair pulled back, a stack of papers with a green flag stuck to the second page. "Sorry, everyone," the second woman said. She pulled out a chair. "I'm with the title insurance company. Before we proceed, I need to walk through the chain of title on this property." She read it like a grocery list. No drama at all. That's what I want you to picture. September 1994, grant deed, Edmund and Moira Callander, joint tenants. Mortgage discharged. Refinance discharged. Then she turned to the page with the green flag. December 2008, transfer, granting clause. She read it out. Reserving unto the grantors and the survivor of them a life interest in the said property for the term of their natural lives. Nobody moved. My son-in-law said that's not right. The house has been in Astrid's name since 2008. We've been on the property tax bill. The title woman said, "Yes, you hold the remainder interest. The life interest is registered against it. You cannot convey clear title while the life tenant is living, and no title insurer can issue a policy against a property with an uncleared life interest on it. Without a policy, the lender won't fund." My daughter said, "Mum, did you know about this?" I didn't answer, not for drama. The question didn't require an answer in that room. I had been in the office the day that deed was drafted. The only real question was whether she had ever read it. Then the title woman said there was a second item. She said the power of attorney submitted, registered in 2015, had a revocation instrument registered against it on August 19, 2020. She gave the document number. She said the effect of the revocation was that my daughter had had no authority to execute a listing agreement on my behalf since August of 2020. The listing agreement dated March of this year was void ab initio. Keith said that was impossible. The title woman said it was a matter of public registration. It had been on title for 5 years. Then my son-in-law stood up so fast, his chair hit the wall behind him, and he said this was something the family needed to sort out privately, that this was a family matter. The buyer's lawyer said very quietly that her clients had an appraisal, an inspection, and a rate hold at stake, and that it appeared to be a title matter. Keith said something about speaking to his brokerage. My daughter said, "Mum," in a voice I had not heard from her since she was a child and needed something she couldn't ask for directly. I opened my purse. I took out the Maple Ridge Retirement Living brochure, which I had been carrying since the morning in March when she left it on my kitchen table. I set it in the center, face up by the tissue box, where everyone could see it. Across the top, in white letters over a photograph of a woman laughing on a terrace, "You'll be comfortable here." That was it. That was where the sentence came from. Not from my daughter's concern for me, from a laminated photograph in a marketing brochure. Neither she nor her husband had ever noticed where their own line originated. They hadn't even written it themselves. I said 5 words. "I'm the life tenant. I'm staying." The title insurance representative turned back to her papers, because that is what people who do a proper job do. The weather in the room does not change the checklist. She said she could not issue a policy. Without a policy, the lender, RBC, would not fund. Without funding, there was no sale. She looked around the table and said, politely, that the only path forward would require the life tenant to voluntarily execute a release of the life interest, which would need to be registered on title before any transfer could be completed. 7 people looked at me. I picked up my identification and put it back in my purse. I looked at my daughter. I said, "You'll get the house. You have always been getting the house." Edmund made sure of that. "You get it when I'm finished with it." Not 1 hour before. Then I said good morning to the buyers and told them I was genuinely sorry. And I meant it. And I walked out of a law office on King Street East at 11:15 in the morning through a lobby that smelled like carpet and coffee into a parking lot in Hamilton, Ontario. And I sat in my car for a few minutes before I could get the key all the way into the ignition. The deal collapsed that afternoon. The buyers were out $680 for the appraisal, $740 for the home inspection, and a rate hold fee from their mortgage broker. I sent them a bank draft for $1,420 and a short note that said none of this was their fault, and I hoped their beagle got a yard soon. They sent back a brief email 2 days later. It was kind. The listing came off MLS marked terminated. The property cannot be relisted while the life interest remains on title. That's not a threat. It is a registered fact. It does not move. I filed a complaint with the Real Estate Council of Ontario about Keith Alderton. Not for missing the life interest. That was the title examiner's function. For accepting a listing under a power of attorney without verifying the current registration status of that instrument on title. His brokerage issued a statement within weeks about enhanced verification procedures. The senior transition specialist designation disappeared from his profile. I made a report to the Elder Abuse Ontario Network and was referred to the Hamilton Police Financial Crimes Unit. A detective came and sat at my kitchen table for 40 minutes and went through the folder. She said most of what they see is cash going missing from a joint account. She said she had never seen a registered POA revocation paired with a life interest clause and a green card all in the same file. No charges were laid. There is a file now. It is not empty. On the 1st of July, I went to the garage and took Edmund's bolt cutters off the pegboard. I carried them to the front door. I put the jaws around the shackle of the lockbox and I squeezed. It came off in 2 seconds. 68 days of that thing knocking against my door, and 2 seconds with the right tool. I set the lockbox on the front walk and left it there. Marjorie was in her garden across the street. She stopped what she was doing and watched. Then she crossed the street and stood on my walk, and she cried and she apologized. And I let her, because 19 years of shared garden cuttings buys you one bad spring. She said, "Nobody asked you anything. Not one of us on this whole street asked you a single thing." I said, "No, but you're asking now." My daughter and I speak, less often than before and more carefully, and I have made a kind of peace with the arithmetic of that. Penny moved into the spare room in August. $200 a month, and she vacuums the stairs without being asked. She leaves for her early shifts at 5:30, and I hear the coffee maker through the wall, and I lie there in the dark, and it sounds exactly the way it used to sound. Like someone in this house is awake. And the day is beginning, and those two things are connected to each other. In September, I pruned the lilac hedge back to where the branch broke. It came back the way it always does, listing slightly west, planted crooked by a man who kept meaning to straighten it and never got around to it, who was right in the end to leave it the way it was. I am fine. I am in my home. People tell me I outsmarted my family. I want to be precise about that, because someone listening to this right now is doing the same arithmetic about their own property. There was no cleverness involved. There was a public counter on King William Street and an $11 fee and an index that anyone can walk in off the street and search. My daughter could have typed my name into that terminal on any afternoon for 5 years. She chose not to, because people who are certain of what they have don't think to check what someone else might already be holding. So here is the only thing I know that's worth saying, and I'll keep it brief. They can decide what you are in every room except the one where someone reads the public record out loud. Go find out what's on your title while the choice is still yours to make. A certified copy from your land registry office costs less than lunch. Drop a comment and tell me who told you last. Subscribe if any part of this made you wonder what your own deed actually says. I'll see you in the next one.